All right, so we'll say good morning. Let us begin thanking our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Adam and Yudit Benzev, for dedicating all of the Shiur Midrashos this month in honor of their children, Jake Sarina and Rosie, and our week of learning sponsors, Yehuda and Jennifer Goodhart, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Jennifer's father, Yeshaya Zalman Ben Lazar. We hope that on the merits of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah, and the family a nechama. And also with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Samech 65. We are picking up. We left off on Samech Daled Amud Beis 64b. We left off 4 lines up from the bottom. Last word on line Tnan. So we'll say. So remember again, we are leaving off, or we're picking up in the middle of our machlokes. In the middle of our machlokes regarding which seir it is that you are using. So we'll say, so remember again, we began to speak about this on the top of Samech Daled Amud Beis. That remember again, we're talking about a case where, just to use the Mishnah's example, the seir LaHashem dies. This is after Hagrala, so I've already done the lottery. One is designated LaHashem, one is designated LaAzazel. The seir LaHashem dies. I have to do another lottery, so I bring my replacement seir LaHashem. And the machlokus, of course, becomes which seir LaAzazel do I use? Do I use the seir LaAzazel from group number 1? Do I use the seir LaAzazel from group number 2? This becomes the machlokus Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Rav says, I use the seir LaAzazel from group number 1. Rabbi Yochanan says, I use the seir LaAzazel from group number 2. We spent yesterday's daf focusing on the nature of the machlokas, really focusing much more on Rav's shita than Rabbi Yochanan's shita, and it came out that according to Rav, the reason you use seir number 1 is why? First of all, because Balei Chaim Eino Nitchin, right? That was the core machlokes number 1. Balei Chaim Nitchin, Balei Chaim Eino Nitchin. When an animal is disqualified for sacrificial service, is that disqualification permanent or not? Rav says no. Rabbi Yochanan says yes. And Rav, who says no, therefore says seir number 1, seir LaAzazel number 1 is still usable once you go ahead and give it a new partner, a new seir LaHashem. The first seir LaAzazel once again becomes usable. And also Rav holds like Rabbi Yossi that mitzvah berishona. The mitzvah is to go ahead and use the first animal designated, and we saw that was Rabbi Yossi by Karban Pesach. So that's kind of where we left off. We spoke about Rabbi Yochanan's shita as well, bringing up some rayos from the psukim. I kind of gave away the punchline a little bit yesterday when we saw that the Rambam paskins like Rav, that halacha l'maisa in this case, where you bring a replacement seir LaHashem, you do a new hagrala, a new lottery, replacement seir LaHashem, we use seir LaAzazel number 1. Okay, so I gave away the punchline a little bit, but we still have to go through some of the process. So let's go back there. So Tnan, Shein Chatas Tzibur Mesa. So we'll say, remember again the Mishnah, when speaking about the case of Rabbi Yehuda, we use the phrase She'ein Chatas Tzibur Mesa. So we'll say, so remember again, this was, even before Rabbi Yehuda, this was the halacha l'maisa. So remember again, in the case where now I'm doing a second lottery, I'm bringing the replacement seir LaHashem. So the extra seir LaAzazel, what do you do with it? So because remember again, both according to Rav and according to Rabbi Yochanan, you have an extra seir LaAzazel. It's in machlokas, which one is the extra one? But l'maisa, there is an extra one. There is an extra one. So what do you do with the extra seir LaAzazel? You let it graze until it develops a mum, then go ahead and sell it off and let the money be used for nedava. So it says the Gemara Tran She'ein Chatas Tzibur Mesa, because we'll say the Gemara says because a communal chatas is not left to die. So the Gemara says, interesting enough, what can you infer from there? Ha diyochid ki agavna, which I will say tells you if you were to have a chatas yochid that resembled this case. Now, so what does that mean? What's a chatas yochid that resembled this case? If you would have an extra chatas yochid, let's say as a result of losing your first chatas, or a result of some other type of mix-up, that chatas would be left to die. So the Gemara says, Bishlan Rabbi Yochanan, Kid Rabbi Abba, Amarav. So this makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan was set it up. According to Rabbi Abba, the name of Rav, Don Rabbi Abba Rav, Hakomodim, everyone agrees, top of Samechai, Shem Niskaper V'She'ena Avuda avuda mesa. That if you go ahead and achieve kapara through the animal which was not lost, the one which was lost and then subsequently found is left to die. So what is this talking about? Take a look at the last Rashi on Samach Daled Amud Beis. So Rashi says, Kid Rabbi Abba, Da'amar b'meseches tumura, gabi plugta d'Rabbi v'Rabbanan. Shenechluku b'mafrish chataso, b'ne'ev da v'hifrish acheres tachta. We'll say it's an interesting case. So here's the following situation. I have a chatos. I separated the animal as a chatos. And then what happens? The animal is lost. And I go ahead and I separate out a new chatos. V'nim says harishona, and now you found the first one. So we'll say, so again, classic case. I separated animal A as a chatos. I lose animal A. Okay, I bring animal B as a replacement. I haven't yet offered it. Before I offer up animal B, what happens? I find animal A. So now I have two animals that I've designated as a chatos. So what's the halacha? Harei shtehen omdos. The ka'amar Rabbi miskaper ba'achas mehen ba'ashniya tamos ba'at chachamim omrim ein chata shekibru ba'aleh mesa ela shnun tis akabros. So listen to this. So Rabbi says that halacha l'maisa, use one of them, and the other one is left to die. The other one is left to die. That's the position of Rabbi. The chachamim say ein chata shekibru ba'aleh mesa ela shnun tis la'achar shekibru ba'aleh aval nimsa kodem kapara u'la'achar hafrasha roa. Both listens to Chacham say, no. When we say that a chatas of an individual is left to die, that's when Rabbi say, when you would find the chatas when? Let's say you would find chatas A when? After B was offered. So if you found chatas A after B was offered, then the chatas A is a chatas whose owners have achieved kapara through another chatas. Well, what's the halacha of a chatas shenis karpru ba'aleh b'chatas acher? Ultimately, tamus. So we'll say, an interesting machlokis here. So one more time, I separated a chatos, animal A. I lose animal A. Okay, I separate another chatos, animal B. Before I offer up B, I find A. So now I'll say, first of all, I could use whichever one I want. Although that's a machlokis also. Right? Rabbi Yossi would say, use the first one. But okay, leaving that aside right now, I'm going to offer one. What do I do with the second one? So once again, Rebbe will say, halacha l'maisa, you let it die. Well, so again, we know about letting it die. It's a strange case, but you lock it up, you just starve it, and it just starves to death. Rabbi Abba says, no. That's only in a case where you already achieved kapara through another chatos. But l'maisa, if you haven't yet achieved kapara, so one of them you'll offer, and one of them you'll allow to graze, so to speak, and let it go ahead and develop a mum, sell it. Rabbi Abba, aleh hakomodim, sheniskaber b'she'ena avuda, dahainu shniya, shofresh acharon avuda mesa. Rabbi Abba says that everyone agrees that if you choose to go ahead and achieve kapara through animal number 2, which is what we call the animal that wasn't lost. That's the replacement animal. That's what? That animal A, which was the one that was lost, is left to die. Shekach ne'emra halacha l'Moshe misinai chata sha'avda v'niskabru ba'aleh ba'acheres harishona mesa. Lo nechluku elish niskaber berishona b'ashnemes. Well, says Rabbi Abba wants to come along, and he says like this. It's very interesting. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's only like one little piece in this whole argument, but it's a fascinating case. Rabbi Abba says everyone agrees that if halacha l'maisa you choose to offer up chatas B, everyone agrees that chatas A is left to die. Everyone agrees in that case. The only machlokes Rabbi and the Rabbanon is when you choose to achieve atonement through what? Chatas A. That's where the machlokes is. But if you choose chatas B, everyone agrees A is left to die. And he posits that is a halacha l'Moshe misinai, that a chatas that was lost and its owners achieved kapara through another chatas, and the original chatas is found, even if it's found before the replacement chatas is offered, nevertheless, that chatas is left to die. Rabbi Savar Mafresh Azar Tashlumi Abud Ka'avadami. For Rabbanan Savri Lav Ka'avadami. And the Gemara suggests as follows, that Rabbi holds that ultimately, again, an animal that is separated out to go ahead and replace a lost animal has the status of the lost animal itself, and the Rabbanan say that it does not. So we'll say, so now let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows. So Bishlam al Rabbi Yochanan kid Rabbi Abba Amarav da Rabbi Abba Amarav hakomodim shebnis kapar b'shen avud. Rabbi Abba holds that if you go ahead and you achieve kapara, use the chatas that wasn't lost, i.e. chatas B. That what? B'shein avuda, that avuda mesa, that the animal A is put to death. Ela Rav, but according to Rav, Havi le kimafish shtei chatos la'achrayus. But ultimately, according to Rav, it would be tantamount to a case of separating out two chatas offerings, where you just, let's say if you were to separate out a second chatas offering for achrayus. Achrayus means what? Let's say in general you're a nervous person. So you separate out a chatas, and then you go ahead and you appoint a replacement animal. Everyone would agree that halacha l'maisa, when you offer up one of those animals, the second animal is not left to die. Vam Raboshia, hifrish te chatos la'achrayis. Raboshia said, if you end up separating out two chatas animals for achrayis, miskaper ba'achas mehen, vasheni tira. You atone through you use one of them for atonement, and the second one is left to graze. Kevan damarava, Rav savarla krabiosi dar mitzvah barishona, meikara kimafish li'ibudami. So we'll say, therefore again, Rava will say, that since Rav subscribes to the idea of Rabbi Yossi, namely, that there is a mitzvah to go ahead and use the first animal, right? We're jumping back now to our Mishnah, to use the first se'ir la'azazel. Therefore, again, it's as if you are separating out the second animal to be lost. To be lost. So we'll say that's why halacha l'maisa, again, halacha l'maisa, in the case of the Mishnah, if you were to go ahead, remember, the Mishnah says that what do you do with the extra seir la'azazel? Because both according to Rebbe and Rabbi Yochanan, there's extra seir la'azazel. What does it mean what do you do with the extra seir la'azazel? You let it graze, develop a mum, sell it off, use the money for nidava. The Gemara says, interestingly enough, why? She'ein chatas tzibur mesa. Ultimately, again, because a communal chatas is not left to die. The Gemara says that's interesting, because what we can infer from the Mishnah is that a similar case by a yochid, by an individual, ultimately would be left to die. So what would be a similar case by a yochid? So the similar case by the yochid could be where I went ahead and, again, this goes back to what we mentioned before, that halacha l'maisa, if you had a chatos, you went ahead and you lost it, you went ahead and now designated another one. Before you offer a B, you find A. So halacha l'maisa, again, we have a machlokes, what to do now with the additional carbon. So Rav would say, according to Rav, since he says mitzvah berishona, you would offer up chatos A, and what would you do with B? B ultimately, again, would be left to die. So that would be the parallel case by a carbon yachid or by a chatos yachid, which would be left to die. Okay, so Tanan, Rabbi Huda Omer, Tamos. Rabbi Huda says, no, the animal is left to die. So we'll say, so remember again, this is going back now to the Mishnah. Rabbi Huda says that halacha l'maisa Tamos, that Rabbi Huda says that in the case of the extra se'ir la'azazel, right, whichever se'ir la'azazel is going to be extra, Rabbi Huda says you do leave it to die. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan, Damar Shini Shebezug Vishan Yira, Rabbi Huda Yoma. So what's the current Rabbi Yochanan? Remember, Rabbi Yochanan holds that halacha l'maisa, which se'ir la'azazel do you use? Which one? Rabbi Yochanan says you use the se'ir la'azazel in group number 2. So according to Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Yochanan will say, the current Rabbi Huda, the se'ir la'azazel in group number 1 is left to die. And this the Gemara says, Miskaper b'sheni shebezug sheni. Ultimately, again, kapara will be achieved with the se'ir la'azazel from group number 2. El Rav damar sheni shebezug sheni yira. But according to Rav, who holds that halacha l'maisa, the se'ir la'azazel from the second group is left to pasture until it develops a mum, then sold, and the money is used for an adava. Rabbi Huda Yamus. Rabbi Huda, then you're going to put the first one and the first pair to death. Rabbi Huda Ma'im Skaper. Then ultimately, again, how do you achieve kapara? You're not going to have a se'ir la'azazel at all. To which the Gemara says, no. Mi savish Rabbi Huda sheni shebezug sheni kai. Do you think that Rabbi Huda is referring to the second se'ir la'azazel from the second group? Rabbi Huda asheni shebezug rishon kai. Rabbi Huda is referring to the se'ir la'azazel in the first group. So we'll say, so again, the point the Gemara is making over here is that both according to Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, they're going to have to understand Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah a little bit differently as well, which particular se'ir la'azazel he is referring to. Fine. Vika de kamosif hachi. And there are others who go ahead and set up this discussion in the following way. Va'od am Rabbi Huda, nishpach adam yomos ha-mishtaleach. Meis ha-mishtaleach yishpach adam. So we'll say, so now we're jumping out of this. So I just want to be clear. We're still focused on the machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan in terms of which of the se'ir la'azazels from group A or from group B are you using. The Gemara is not just trying to plug this machlokes, it's trying to figure out how this machlokes reads through the rest of the Mishnah. So now we're jumping to the end of the Mishnah. What was the end of the Mishnah? This is actually very interesting. Rabbi Huda said as follows. Nishpach Adam Yamos HaMishtaleach. So we'll say in this case over here, we're fast forwarding a little bit, right? The beginning of the Mishnah is talking about where you drew the lotteries, lost one of the animals, right? And then found the animal before anything was slaughtered. Okay, then what do you do? Which animal do you use? Now we'll say the Gemara is fast forwarding a little bit. Rabbi Yochanan is saying things like this. You've slaughtered the seir LaHashem. You slaughtered it already. You have the dam, but you have not yet done the blood service. You haven't yet done the avodah with the dam. Before you did the avodah, what happens? The blood spilled. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Nishpach Adam, if the blood spilled, the mishtaleach is put to death. In other words, we don't use it. We don't use it. Similarly, Mesa mishtaleach, if the mishtaleach died before the blood service was done, then yishpoch hadam, the blood is spilled out. So we'll say, now let's analyze a little bit. V'ika da kamosev hachi, va'odon Rabbi Yehuda, nishpach hadam yamos ha-mishtaleach, Mesa mishtaleach yishpoch hadam. So bishlama l'rav, reisha pligi bechatas sibor, v'seifa pligi b'balei chaim. So we'll say, according to Rav, what you'll say is like this. According to Rav, the Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, is a machlokis regarding chatos, right? I'm sorry. Reisha pligi bechatas sibor. The first part of the Mishnah is a machlokes about chatos tzibor. In other words, they're both saying specifically again, so what do you do in the case where now you have a second pair of animals, right? A second pair. Which seir are you going to use ultimately again as the chatos, as the seir lazazel? The seifa pligi bebalei chayim. And the end of the Mishnah, the machlokes is whether or not balei chayim nitchin or not. El Rabbi Yochanan, my va'od, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, what does it mean Rabbi Yehuda says va'od? Kasha. I both say that'll be a kasha. Good. So we'll say, so that closes out the machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Again, as we've seen again, this last part that we just the first part of Amud Aleph was just trying to figure out how to read that machlokes ultimately into the Mishnah. Bottom line is that we paskin like Rav, namely again in a situation where the seir LaHashem dies. You do a lottery on another pair. So you have your replacement seir LaHashem. You use the seir LaAzazel from group number 1. What happens to the seir LaAzazel from group number 2? What happens to that? You let it graze, develop a mum, use the money to go ahead and buy nidava. Why? She'ein chatas tzibor mesa. Another two halachic principles that come out from that is number 1, ein ba'alei chayim nidchin. When a sacrificial animal is disqualified, if the disqualification is removed or is somehow just obviated, it's no longer there, so the animal becomes usable again. And also we paskin mitzvah barishona, that whenever you could use the first animal designated, that is preferable. We also see the Mishnah's rule, ein chatas tzibur mesa, that although I will say in situations where an individual achieved atonement through a different chatas, the remaining chatas will be put to death. Halacha l'mayis, again, chatas tzibur is never left to die. Beautiful. Now Rabbi Yehuda. V'odon Rabbi Yehuda, nishpach adam niyamos v'shnas. We'll say, let's analyze this case. So bishlama, nishpach adam yamos mishtaleach takat lo savim mitzvaseh. So we'll say, I understand the first case. In the case of where the dam of the seir LaHashem spilled. And it spilled when? Before you had a chance to do the avoda. So bishlama nishpach hadam. So if the blood spilled before you had the chance to do the avoda, so yamos ha-mishtaleach. So ultimately, again, the mishtaleach is put to death. Why? Da'akati lo isavid mitzvaseh. Because I will say, remember again, at that point in time, the mitzvah has not yet been performed. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. It's the last 3 short lines in Rashi. Bishlama nishpach adam yos lo isavid mitzvaseh. Didam v'chuka b'dvarim hanasim b'begdei lavan ksiva v'tzarach lahavi dam acher v'efshar below hagrala. So let's listen to this. Now remember, Rabbi Yehuda agree. Just follow this for just a moment. Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Yochanan, namely Balei Chaim Nidchin. He accepts that premise. Now we'll say, now that's what Rashi brings down. Now actually we just saw that before in the Gemara as well. Now watch this case. So now let's just follow the process. Kohen Gadol did the Hagrala, did the lottery, everything went well. Seir LaHashem, seir LaAzazel. Good. Shechs the seir LaHashem. He's taking the blood, going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, right? Because remember, inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim is the first blood avoda that he's doing. On the way in, he trips, he goes ahead and spills all of the blood. So what does he need to do now? What do you have to do? new se'ir la'Hashem. Right? How do you get a new se'ir la'Hashem? How do you get a new se'ir la'Hashem? New lottery. Remember again, what we established in the Mishnah is the only time you could simply replace the animal with a new lottery is when? If the animal died before the lottery. Right? So remember again, if I have two animals, two seirim, and I know I'm going to use this for the lottery, and one of them dies, obviously if I'm pre-lottery, I could just replace the animal that died. Once you've done the lottery, and one of the animals dies before all of the avodah is complete, you need to re-lottery. I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm saying you need to lottery again. Lotterize. You need to lotterize once again. So I'll say, so again, interestingly enough, now watch this. Now, if you have to do another lottery, Rabbi say, that means I need a new se'ir la'Hashem. If I have a new se'ir la'Hashem, then what does this mean I now have as well? A new se'ir la'Azazel. Rabbi Yehuda holds Balei Chayim Nitchin, which means Rabbi say, once the blood spills, that means the se'ir la'Hashem, I need a new se'ir la'Hashem. Once in the new se'ir la'Hashem, what's the status of se'ir la'Azazel that's standing in the mikdash? What's the status? What's its status? Unusable. Right? Why is it unusable? Because the se'ir la'Azazel is unusable if the se'ir la'Hashem, if its avodah has not been done. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, therefore, Rabbi say, in a case, follow this for just a moment, in a case where the blood spilled before the avodah was done, the se'ir la'Azazel becomes unusable. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda holds Ba'alei Chayim Nitchin. So once that se'ir la'Azazel is nitcha, it's disqualified. I'm going to do another lottery, and essentially I'm going to get a new se'ir la'Hashem, and he passes like Rabbi Yochanan, then I'm going to use the se'ir la'Azazel from the second pair. So therefore again, Nishbach Hadam, if the blood of the se'ir la'Hashem spills, Yamos HaMishtaleach. Ultimately, again, the Mishtaleach is left to die because there's nothing you could do with it because it is disqualified. So that case I understand. So Ella Mesa Mishtaleach HaMayish B'Chadam. We'll say, what about the second case? Let's go back a little bit. Right? Then Rabbi Yehuda says, if the Mishtaleach dies, you spill the dam. So why? If the Mishtaleach dies, I have to go ahead and spill out the dam. But so obviously, remember, when is the Mishtaleach dying? When is Se'ir la'Azazel dying? When? Before the blood service has been done. Right? So the Kohen Gadol is walking into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He hears someone cry out, Baruch Dayan HaEmes. The Se'ir la'Azazel died. Well, I mean, it was going to die anyway, but it died a little bit earlier, right? Not from a cliff, but maybe just from the fright of the cliff, right? The knowledge, right? So L'maisa again, we pour out the blood. Both say, and if you pour out the blood, then what does that mean you're doing? Right? Totally new hagrala, totally new lottery again. So the Gemara says, that case I don't understand. Ha is aved le mitzvah, but the mitzvah has already been performed. They both say, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Ela meisa mishtaleach, lama lo tashlumin sha'ata maskika lo lahavi shnaim ulahagrav lishbach tamarishon. Ha is avid mitzvah. Say the se'ir mishtaleach kol davar hama'akiv bo eino ela hagrala bilva likvoa goral shel shem al shalo. So we'll say this is actually pretty wild. We haven't discussed in the Gemara yet, but the Gemara is suggesting. We'll say the only part of the se'ir la'azazel service that is ma'akiv is what? Is the lottery. This is pretty wild. So in other words, there is a whole avodah associated with the se'ir la'azazel, but the only part that is an indispensable necessity is the lottery. In other words, once the lottery is done, you've pretty much, in other words, once you've designated a se'ir la'azazel, you've pretty much fulfilled the basic core obligation. Anything else is additional. So therefore, again, in a case, as long as the se'ir la'azazel died after designation, one can make the argument that what? The avodah is done. If the avodah is done, then why do I have to spill out the blood of the se'ir la'Hashem? Just finish up Rashi. Dashamina le Rabbi Yehuda da'amar lo izvada kosher. The kosher in the shiluach lo ma'aki le divrei hakol. The chik sivchuka advarim shaklin osev big day love and v'ladar. So again, we're going to see this inside Mishnah. But Lamaisa, the Gemara is suggesting the only thing you really need for se'ir la'azazel is hagrala, is lottery. Once lottery is done and its identity is solidified and concretized, that's enough. So if the se'ir la'azazel dies, as long as it's after the lottery, then Lamaisa again, watch that to spill out the blood. To which the Gemara said, "Well, say pretty incredible." Amrid be'Rabbi Yanai Amakra Ya'amod Chaylif Me'Hashem lechaper. Because the pasuk says that the se'ir la'azazel has to be standing chai, living before Hashem lechaper, to atone. Ad Masi Yizakag Lios Chai. How long does the Sir Lazazel have to be living? Ad Shas Matan Dam Shel Chavero, until Kapara. And when is Kapara achieved? When the blood application is done. So we'll say, interestingly enough, you're right. The Sir Lazazel doesn't have to make it to the cliff. It doesn't even have to live for very long, but it must be alive at least as long as what? At least until when? The blood applications have been done. So I'll say, really quite fascinating. Look at Rashi. Lios Chai. Shelo Yomos ad Shas Matan Damo Shel Chavero. Im Humeis Kodem Lochein. Ein Kaparas Adam Klum. Lochein Tzarech Tashom. Sefer Rabosai. Now I understand the two cases of Rabbi Yehuda. So in case number one, where the blood spills, right? The dam spills before the avoda, meis hamishtalayach. That makes sense. Why? Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda holds balei chaim nidchin. Once the blood spills, I need another Sir LaHashem. Once I don't have a Sir LaHashem, the Sir LaZazel, the current Sir LaZazel becomes nidched, disqualified, and therefore, again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, chatos tzibur meisak, chatos is left to die when kapara is going to be achieved through another. Fine, in that case, I understand. What about, again, Meis HaMishtaleach, Nishpach Adam? How does that case work? Right? If the Mishtaleach does have to spill out the blood, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that Allah Chalamayse, Yamur Chalif Ne Hashem. The Seir Lazazel must remain alive, at least for the duration of the blood service. And therefore, Allah Chalamayse, if the Seir Lazazel died before the Matan Damim, Allah Chalamayse, again, you have to go ahead and spill out the blood and do the Sir LaHashem again. Another Hagrala. Incredible. So Tanas will say this is an interesting case. Tanas, and we learned Bnei Ha'ir Sheshalchu Shikleyen. So we'll say this is just, we're going to see this is Rabbi Yehuda also. Rabbi Yehuda holds like this. We'll say nothing to do with our Mishnah. Just again, as we've already been through Shas enough to know that very often when the Gemara quotes a particular opinion, the Gemara will then quote other memras, other statements of that same Tana. So this is just, again, so Rabbi Yehuda, we just had this in Shkalim. Tana some Bnei Ha'ir Sheshalchu Shikleyen. So we'll say here's the case. Residents of the city are contributing their machzas hashekel, but I'm not going to make it to Yerushalayim myself. So what do? I get the people of my city. We send our half shekel, a machzas hashekel, with a shaliach, with an agent. So what happens? V'nignevu o she'avdu, and what happens? The shaliach either loses the money or he's robbed. So what's the halacha? In nisrama truma. So we'll say, now watch this. If when the shliach was on his way, they had already gone ahead and removed the first batch of shkalim from the shofar, from the collection box. Well, so remember again, we saw that halacha l'maisa, when they removed the first batch of shkalim, who's included in that removal, or right, who's part of that machzas hashekel removal? Everyone. Right? Remember again, when they withdraw money, remember, because the money of machzas hashekel is used for what? At least initially, what is it used for? Karbanos Sibor, right? Census also, right? That's like the paradigmatic example. But Lamaisa, when we speak about the year after year use of Machzas HaShekel, that was for Karbanos Sibor. Well, Karbanos Sibor have to go ahead and include everyone. So therefore, again, when they withdrew the money based on the people who contributed and the people whose money was in transit, right? They included everyone in that. So now watch this. If ultimately, again, if halacha l'maisa, as the agent was in transit, the money was being withdrawn, therefore the townspeople were already included in the withdrawal, therefore both say, who suffers the loss? Who suffers the loss? Really the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore what? The Gemara says, Nishba'in ligizbarin. Ultimately, again, the agent, the shaliach, has to take a shvuah that he was not negligent or misappropriate the money, and he has to swear to the temple treasurer. Because in this case, since, again, when the money left the townspeople's hands, the withdrawal was already being made in the Beis HaMikdash, it's considered to be Beis HaMikdash money, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, the loss is incurred by the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, the shaliach must swear that he was honest to the gizbar. Ve'im lav, but if halacha l'maisa, the money was in transit, and they had not yet made a withdrawal from the Beis HaMikdash coffers, then what? Nishpa'in lebnei ha'ir. They have to, right, the shaliach has to swear to the townspeople that he was not negligent, and the Gemara says, Nishpa'in lebnei ha'ir, u'bnei ha'ir shoklin achirim tachtehen. And we'll say what happens, the loss has to be borne by the townspeople, and the townspeople have to go ahead and send in another machzas hashekel. Good. Nimtzu oshech zimak. We'll say what happens if the money's found. Right, the shliach lost the money, or the money was stolen. And what happens? Either the money is found, or the ganav does tshuva, returns the money, Elu v'elu shkalim. So we'll say now in this case over here, so in this case, this really goes back on the second case. In case number 2, where again the townspeople contributed their machzah shekel, sent their machzah shekel with the shaliach. Shliach was robbed. The Beis Hamikdash has not yet done their collection, has not yet done their withdrawal. Therefore, again, the Shliach swears to the townspeople. Townspeople contribute another machzah shekel. But so imagine the following situation. Now, the Shliach they trust the same guy. He's now delivering the money to the Beis Hamikdash, and on his way, the Ganav comes running to him. I'm sorry, I'm the guy who stole from you. And the Shaliach has 2 bags of machzis hashekel from the same townspeople. What's the halacha? Elu ve'elu shkalim heim. Both of these, but all of this money has a set as machzah shekel. Ve'in olin lahen l'shana haba. So I'll say again, so you would think to yourself, well, a simple 8 says, no problem. Use one of them for this year's machzah shekel, and what? One of them for next year. Tanakama says, doesn't work. You cannot use this year's shkalim for next year's collection. So everything is going to go ahead and have the set of machzah shekel, but you cannot allocate it for next year. Rabbi Huda says, no, olin lahen l'shana haba. Rabbi Huda says, no, not true. You can go ahead and use it for next year's collection. So according to Rabbi Huda, you can go ahead and use this year's machzah shekel ultimately again for next year. So my time is Rabbi Huda. What's Rabbi Huda's logic? Amar Rava, Kasav Rabbi Huda, Chovos Shel Shana Zu, Krevos L'Shana Abba. The Rabbi Huda holds that ultimately again, money that was separated to satisfy a present year's debt can go ahead and be used for next year. But if you look at Rashi, it's the last 2 lines in Rashi. Chovos shel shana zu, shehufrashu l'chovos shana zu. Rabbi Huda holds that if you separate out money to satisfy a halachic debt, right, a religious debt for this year, and again that debt was paid with something else, you can go ahead and use that money for the year to come. So the Gemara says that's Rabbi Huda. So the Gemara. So I'm sorry. Rabbi Huda. Amarava. Sorry, Rabbi Huda. Chovos shel shana zu, krevos shana haba. So Eisvei Abaye raises the kasha. Is that true? Rabbi Huda holds. So we'll say that something set aside to go ahead and satisfy a debt of this year can then be reallocated to satisfy a halachic debt for next year. Is that true? We'll say, watch this case. Eisvei Abaye. Let's listen to this case. You have a par and a sire of Yom Kippur that were lost. So I'll say, so remember again, a par is the par of the Kohen Gadol, sire is the similar we was talking about. So what happens? So sha'avdu, so I'll say, here's the case. I have a par and a sire of Yom Kippur that were set aside and were subsequently lost. And what happens? As a result, they go ahead and they separate out new animals. And then what happens? And then what happens? Same idea. Sirei avodah zara. So we'll say Sirei avodah zara is halacha l'maisa, is the case of where Beis Din made an erroneous ruling. As a result of that ruling, the tzibor worshipped avodah zara. They bring a special carbon of a sir la'avodah zara. Same idea. We separated out the seir for avodah zara, communal avodah zara. The seir was lost. They separated out now a new animal. And then they went ahead and separated out new animals. And on both sides, the unwritten part of the Gemara is then what happened? What happened? They found the old animals. So again, Yom Kippur, we had a par and a sire. We lost the par and the sire, separated out a new par and a sire. Then before anything was offered, found the old par of the sire, Sirei avodah zara. We lost it, separated out a new seir, and what? And now found the old one before we offered anything. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Kulon yamusu di Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda says, everything is left to die. Now I will say, when he says everything's left to die, what he means is that Lamaisa, again, you offer up the replacements, and the original ones are left to die. Okay, so the Gemara says, Di Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Yiru, Ad Shistavu, V'imachar v'yiplu d'meim l'nedava, she'ein chatas tzibor mesa. Ultimately, again, so I'll say now, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon arguing Rabbi Huda, and they say, no, it doesn't have to be left to die. You let it graze, develop a moment, sell it off. Rabbi will say, but again, what's the problem? According to Rabbi Huda, what did Rabbi Huda just say by shkalim? What's the halacha if you lose your shkalim and then find your shekel? What's the halacha? Use one of them for next year. So I would have thought that according to Rabbi Yehuda, I will say, leave aside Sirei Avodah Zarah. But by Yom Kippur, why should you have to let the par and the sa'ir die? What can you just do? Use it for next year. In other words, why do you have to let it die? In other words, Rabbi Yehuda just said that Allah Lamaisa, Chovol Shel Shana Zu, obligations of this year can be reallocated for next. So I don't understand why in this case of a sacrificial animal for Yom Kippur, just leave it for next year. Why do you have to let it die? To which the Gemara says, Amar Lei, he said to him, Amad Beis, Karbanos Tzibor Ka'amrit, Shiny Karbanos Tzibor, Kid Rabbi Tavi Am Rabbi Yoshia. So we'll say, no. The Gemara says, no. Halacha Lamaisa, it's different. Remember, it's true. Rabbi Yehuda says you could use the machzis hashakel of this year to satisfy your obligation for next year. But karbanos tzibor are different, right? Communal offerings are different. Communal offerings cannot be reallocated for next year. Why not? Because of Rabbi Tavi and Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Tavi and Rabbi Yoshia, Amrakra, Zos olas chodesh bechadsho. The Torah, right? Amra Torah, Chadesh, Vahavi li karban mitruma chadasha. Because Rabbi said by communal offerings there is a din. That's what? That comes Nisan. Communal offerings must come from the New Year's funds. Right? Chadesh Vavi Zos olas chodesh bechadsho, which literally means this is the olah that's brought every single Rosh Chodesh. Amar Torah, we darshan Chadesh, renew, v'habili karban truma chadasha. Go ahead and bring communal offerings from the new collection. That's why you can't go ahead and, so for example, focusing on Yom Kippur, if they lose the par and the sa'ir, get replacement ones, then find the old ones before they offer up the new ones. Halacha l'maisa, although we're trying to say, just save them for next year. Use it for next year, not a problem. That doesn't work by communal offerings. Communal offerings must come from New Year's funds. New Year's funds means from funds replenished in the Beis Hamikdash on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Look at Rashi just a moment. Rashi says, Chodesh bechadsho, l'chadshe chidushin yiseri ksivi, l'drash l'omer l'cha, yesh chodesh sha'ata tzarech l'chadesh ha'karbanos la'avim mitruma chadasha, u'gmar shana Nisan. So we'll say, that's talacha. Therefore, again, you can't allocate it for next year, because it has to come from new funds. Now, we'll say, now 1 second. Ha tenach soyer. That works for the Seir, because most of the Seir of Yom Kippur is a communal offering. But par, I will say, remember again, who pays for the par? The Kohen Gadol. The par comes to the Kohen Gadol's own money. Par ma'ikal meimar. So I will say, remember again, the par itself ultimately comes from the Kohen Gadol's money. If that's the case, then when you lose the par, find the par. Why not go ahead and simply push the par to next year? In other words, why is there a need? Halacha l'maisa. Why is there a need halacha l'maisa to let it die? So the Gemara says, Gzeira par atu soyer. We're afraid that if we let you leave over the par, right? Because we'll say again what the Gemara is saying. You're saying good. According to Rabbi Yehuda, inachinami. If you lose the par of Yom Kippur and then you find it, you really shouldn't have to let it die. But rather, what should you do? Just put it in storage, right? Put it in par storage until next year, and go ahead and use it for Yom Kippur next year. Technically, you could do it. We're concerned that if we let you do it by par, you'll do it by sire. And why can't you do it by sire? Why can't you have the sire for next year? Why not? Because it's a carbon sibur, and carbon sibur must always come from new funds. So the sa'ir of Yom Kippur for next year must come from new funds that will only be collected as of Rosh Chodesh Nisan in that following year. So that doesn't work. But we won't let you keep the par lest you come to go and keep this sa'ir. So Gemara says, really? Umishum gezira yamusu. So therefore, because of a concern that if we let you keep the par, you'll come to keep this sa'ir, we're going to let the par die? Does that make sense? Furthermore, Had Rabbi Tevi Am Rabbi Yoshia Gufa Mitzvahi. We'll say furthermore again, this idea of purchasing communal offerings from newly replenished funds in Chodesh Nisan is a mitzvah. We'll say, what does mitzvah mean? Mitzvah means it's good, l'chatchila. But b'di'avad, if you purchased communal offerings from old monies, that works as well. After all, the Gemara says, "Dam Rabbi Yehuda Mishmol, Kabano Sibra Abayim be'Acha b'Nisan, mitzvah l'havi min hachadash." At the end of the day, it is a mitzvah to bring communal offerings from new monies. V'im hevi min hayashan yatsa. Allah, if you ended up bringing communal offerings from old money, right? We'll say old money means money collected from the previous year, before Chodesh Nisan, you're still Yotzei. So, Ela Shechaser Mitzvah, but rather again, you missed out on a Lechatchila. So it's only Lechatchila to bring. So I'll say, here what's happening over here. You're telling me, technically speaking, you should be able to go ahead. It's right. So I'll say, remember our case. Yom Kippur, I lose my par and my Sayr. I bring replacement animals. So what do you do? What do you do now? I'm going to offer up the replacement. What do I do with the originals? What do I do with them? Mesa. Rabbi Yehuda says they're left to die. But ask Rabbi Yehuda 1 second. You're the same Rabbi Yehuda who holds that by the case of shkalim, if you lose your shkalim, right, before they get to the Beis HaMikdash, and then you find and then you designate new ones, and then you find your old ones, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? What can you do? Use one set of shkalim for this year, and what? One for next year. So why don't they say the same thing by Yom Kippur? Use one par of Yisrael for this year, and one par of Yisrael for next year. No, you can't do that. Why not? Because halacha l'maisa, right, it has to come from replenished communal funds. So first of all, says the Gemara, number one, it's only the soy that comes from communal funds. The par comes from the Kohen Gadol's own money. That's number one. Right? The Gemara says, you're right. But so let's at least hold on to the par. No, we can't let you hold on to the par for next year, lest you come to hold on to the sar for next year. But 1 second, the Gemara says, even the fact that this sar has to come from newly replenished communal funds, only chatchila, right? But b'diavad, even if you brought the sar from old funds, it works. So you're going to tell me now that we're going to let the par and the sa'ir both die, tamos, really only because of a lachatchila? Right? So what we're focusing on over here is you should at least be able to hold on to the par. Really, even the sire also. But even if you want to try to know, we don't. The sire should come from new funds, the chatchila. The power comes from the Kohen Gadol's own pocket. You should be able to hold on to it for next year. So because of a chatchila, we're going to let both these animals die. We'll say, watch this. Ela amra bizeira lefi shenagara kova mishana lechaberta. And you know, the Gemara says no. There's a different reason. Why can't you go ahead? Remember again, the seer that we're talking about is the seer Lashem, the seer Lazazel. So why can't you hold on to the seer for next year, Abosai? Interestingly enough, because the goral only works for 1 year. Right? In other words, you can't go ahead and lotterize something this year and use that same lottery status for next year. Okay? To which the Gemara says, fine. Vinesi vinagriel. So then, I don't understand. Hold on to the Seirim for next year, and when next year comes, what should you do? To another Goral. What's the big deal? No, because we're afraid people will say that people are not going to know that you did a new lottery. People will just assume that you're relying on the lottery results from last year for this year's avoda. So the Gemara says, okay, hatenach sayir. First of all, that's only by Sawyer, because by Sawyer there's a lottery. Par ma'ikal meimar. So I'll say, even if Amos you want to tell me I can't keep the Sawyer, but I should be able to keep the par, to which the Gemara says, Gzeira par atu Sawyer. We're concerned that if we let you go ahead and keep the par, you'll come to keep the Sawyer as well. Umishum Gzeira yamusu. So I'll say, the Gemara just says, this is really just getting a little bit far-fetched. So because of really, really secondary types of concerns, you're going to let perfectly good karbanos just die. Amru Rabbanan coming that by. The Rabbanan said this over in front of the Babai. No, what's the concern? Gezeira mishum chata shemesu ba'aleh. So I'll say, what's the concern? This is fascinating. The concern is that if we let you go ahead and keep the par and the sire for next year, you may run into a case of a chatas whose owner has died. See, I'll say, remember again, it's possible that over the course of the year, what's going to happen? The Kohen Gadol is going to die. If the Kohen Gadol dies, you can't use that animal next year, because that is a case of chatas shemesu ba'aleh. But in a case of a carbon chatas where the owner has died, that animal cannot be offered up once the owner has died. And we're concerned, if the Kohen Gadol dies over the course of the year, they may come to inadvertently offer up the carbon. So the Gemara said, first of all, hatinach par. That only applies to par, because the par is the chatos of the Kohen Gadol. That doesn't apply to the seer, because we'll say, who's the bailam, who's the owner of the soyer? Who's the bailam of the soyer? The tzibor. So the Gemara says, hatinach par, soyer ma'ikal meimar, gezera soyer atu par. We're concerned that if we let you keep the soyer, you'll come to keep the par. Okay, if the Gemara says, really, omishum gezera yamusu. So again, I will say, the Gemara says, remember, allowing these animals to die is a pretty serious way to deal with this situation. Ela gezera mishum chatos sha'avra shnasa. But with this we'll have to stop. But the Gemara says, no, there's a gzeira that what? There's a gzeira that halacha l'maisa, you may come to utilize a chatas that is over a year old. So I will say, now the Gemara says, by the way, there is a different discussion, which is, a chatas is only valid if the animal is within 1 year. So the Gemara says, we're concerned that if we let you keep it until next year, the animal may be over a year. To which the Gemara says, Gzeirahi, Gufa chata shavash nasihi. But we have to stop with this, but we'll say, but the Gemara says, Gzeira isn't, if you save the animal till next year, isn't the animal automatically over a year old? So we'll have to stop with this as well, so we'll pick up Emirat Hashem with this piece. So we'll say, so again, just so you understand what we're leaving off with. Right? We're leaving off with the following. We got into a totally unrelated discussion of Rabbi Yehuda. A machlokes by machzis shekel. Right? The machlokes by machzis shekel was, you separated shkalim, essentially lost your first set of shkalim, separated the second set of shkalim. What's the halacha? They're both shkalim. Rabbi Yehuda says, what can you do with one of the sets of shkalim? What can you do? Defer, use it for next year's debt. So Rabbi Yehuda essentially allows me to take this year's obligation and set it aside for next year's use. All the Gemara is doing is contrasting Rabbi Yehuda's shita by shkalim with the shita by Yom Kippur. Because you hold by Yom Kippur that the par and sa'ir of Yom Kippur is lost, and you go ahead and designate replacements, and then you find the original ones. You cannot use the original ones for next year. And all we're trying to do is to figure out why not. The last piece we're up to now is because the issue of using it next year is by the time you get to next year, it may age out of the permitted chatas bracket. The Mitzvah will pick up with that piece tomorrow.